Billy Carson says the ark is a technological device. Yeah, what's going on, party people? The place to be. I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Happy Friday to each and every one of y'all. We made it through another week, and we gotta be thankful for that because many people cannot make the same statement as of right now. So I want to say what's up to the party people in the chat, and when I mean party people, I mean party person. Nate2D2. The indelible, the incredible one himself, king of all mods. Definitely appreciate you here, sir. If you have not yet already, please share the link. Tell a friend that's him again. And if you like how it goes down with BK, you can show your appreciation via PayPal, which is put in the top of the chat. Or if you'd like to be a monthly supporter of BK, you can become a patron. You get an assortment of goodies to enhance your personal Bible study. And we got Nick Quint in the building. What's going on? All right. So please share. Yes, and also, thank you, sir. Please smash that like button. So we got Bodega Lady D New on the check-in. What's going on? So we'll be discussing a very quick video by Billy Carson. Many of you have become very familiar with his work. Carry on the tradition of the ancient alien worldview. So he has a very interesting take on what the Ark of the Covenant is actually, what its function is. Yeah, D-New. So brace yourself. Brace yourself. So with that, let's see here. How do we do this? Okay. All right, here we go. All right, cool. Here we go.
I have a theory as to what the Ark of the Covenant was and what happened to it.
The Ark of the Covenant was a technological device that was a real, incredible power source. It may have been even a nuclear power source, because when you read the description of what happens when you're not wearing the right type of attire to handle it, you see that the people are having what appears to be radiation sickness, hair falling out, eyes bleeding, nails falling out. If you touch it in the wrong spot where there's this electrical charge, you die instantaneously because it's going to stop your heart. And so I believe that it was a high power, highly charged device that ran potentially off of nuclear power or had some source of extreme radiation that would come out of it. I believe that there were more than one Ark of the Covenant. I think that there was actually 3 Arks of the Covenant. For whatever reason, these things have seemingly disappeared. Now, one, what more recently was discovered to be in Ethiopia at a church and being guarded by the church priest. Somebody had broke in and stole it. They didn't have a military. They just took it. So the last one that we knew where it potentially could have been is now gone as well.
Do you have a theory as to what?
Yeah. So, yeah, Nick. Yeah. So the meltdown of Chernobyl wasn't nuclear malpractice. It was the Ark of the Covenant. You guessed it. Nothing get past you, Nick. So yeah. So he's making a claim that basically the Ark of the Covenant was some sort of nuclear powered device, a weapon, if you will. And again, this is where historical, cultural context, many of us in the UA, we make a big deal about context, because without context, you're just going to misrepresent and say things such as Billy Carson. He cites no sources. It's just a matter of fact, and that's it. So let's look at some context so we can have a better understanding of what the Ark of the Covenant actually is. And we have to do these type of videos because Mr. Carson has a large following. And many people take what he says at face value. So, yes, Wakanda forever. Absolutely. Absolutely, Nick. So with that, let's share this screen and let's get to it. All right. So, all right, good. You see that. All right. So we're going to be quoting a lot from our good friend, Dr. David Falk. This is his book, The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context. All right. So we're going to be looking at his work. And in fact, funny enough, this is how I got to know Dr. Falk, because I was getting into more of the cultural context of the Ark and where it came from. And I found a paper written by Dr. David Falk. And at this point, I do not know who he is. I reached out to him, found out he was an Egyptologist. I'm like, would you mind coming on the program and speaking on these matters? Come to find out, he's a believer. And I'm like, I didn't know there was a lot of believers in Egyptology, but there is a minority. And he came on the show, and we've been friends ever since. So shout out to Dr. Falk. And let's look at what he has unearthed here for us. We find that the reason for the existence of the ark revolves around the word covenant. The holiness of Yahweh, this is Syrian, facilitated by way of a treaty or concession the ark. He provided a means where he could dwell in close proximity to his people, his vassals. He did this so that they could have relationship with him. The ark was a visible symbol of the agreement with his people. Having this agreement, God could set aside hostilities and the Israelites could be his people. We could pretty much end the video right here, because clearly we see what the functionality and use of the ark was. It's a symbol of the connection of a treaty, of a suzerain vassal treaty between the suzerain Lord, in this case Yahweh, and the vassal, in this case Israel. But let's continue. Few of us ever stop to think about what makes a chair, or what defines a chest. Most of us intuitively recognize furniture because form and furniture, we need to set out some common characteristics of these objects. The reason is because while furniture is normally pretty common sense stuff, when religious use is involved, the basic ideas that define furniture are expanded. At its simplest, furniture is a piece of large movable equipment that makes a space suitable for living or working. But for ritual furniture, this becomes an object that prepares a unit of space for an encounter with divinity. Not Chernobyl, right? Not 3 Mile Island, not, the MX missile, right? It's an encounter with divinity. Generally, these objects can make space usable in one of two ways. These objects can separate or encapsulate one space from another. That is, divide one space into two or more. This is a bit like modern room dividers, or they can add a new quality to an already sanctified portion of space. That is, change one type of space into another. For example, adding a chair turns an empty room into a sitting room. So we have some shrines. This is the car shrine being carried with neck straps at Edfu Temple, right? So we're starting to see like the evolution of what Israel came to have, which we now call the ark. All right, so we see this in Egypt. Ritual processional furniture was typically dedicated to a person, either a human being or a god. For example, the chest of Anubis was associated with the Egyptian god that escorted the dead into the afterlife. Tying furniture into a person became an Egyptian religious use, the way that the dead influenced the affairs of the living. The barks of deceased kings influenced onlookers into obedience to the now divine monarch. Moreover, ritual furniture could serve as a kind of container or vessel. Chests and boxes are an obvious kind of storage, but this characteristic also applies to sacred barks because barks are shrines holding votive images in cabinets, as well as palanquins, vessels made for holding and carrying humans or the statues of gods. Reliefs from the tomb of Ankh-Mahor, early Dynasty 6, shows several chests being carried to the tomb. Each chest was brought to the tomb with carrying poles set below the center of gravity. This had the advantage of raising a chest up so that it could be seen. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But stability was a known problem. From this tomb, 2 porters carried a large chest with tall legs and a peak lid tied with ropes. The purpose of the ropes was to provide a kind of security seal. While packaging items for the afterlife, the packer tied a string around the box, then sealed it with a clay bulla to prevent tampering. In this relief, one porter carrying the chest steadied the box with a single hand. This shows that stability was a problem when the poles were at the bottom of the chest. So here we have a relief of a chest being carried by poles with flanges. Looks a lot like the Ark of the Covenant, doesn't it? Right? So this is a container that separates us mere mortals from the divine. Okay. The most famous of these chests is the Anubis chest of King Tutankhamun. The chest was built upon a sledge with 2 sturdy carrying poles permanently attached. The interior had 5 compartments, 4 small compartments at the front and a large compartment at the rear. Gold foil completely covered the wood chest poles and lid. Again, sounds awfully familiar. The Anubis statue on the lid was wood and painted with thick black paint. The craftsman gave the statue gemstone eyes and gold eye lines. The craftsman made the statue as one piece with its flat, corniced lid. The lid simply lifted off the top of the chest. This design is similar to the Ark, which had the mercy seat resting as a lid on top of the box. And here we have the Anubis chest from the tomb of Nojmet. This is from the Egyptian Museum. You see you have the top, you have the sled, and if you look down, you see where you would put the poles in to carry this chest, right? Now, of course, we see a big difference between the Ark and this. And the biggest difference is what's on top, right? What's on top is an idol, a representation of the god, in this case, Anubis. With our Ark, there is no statue, right? There is no idol because Yahweh is not a contingent being. He's not a dog. He's not a crocodile. He is not contingent. He's not made of stuff. He's beyond space-time. So how does one create a form when Yahweh has no form unless he decides to take form, right? So by Israel having an ark without an idol on top of its lid, that is a huge theological point being made for Israel every time they look at the ark. But let's continue. Here's another Anubis chest of Tutankhamun, right? So this one already has the permanent poles as the sled with the lid on top, right? Again, very familiar to the Ark of the Covenant that we know of. We've seen our journey that the history of chests and boxes in ancient Egypt is extensive and complex, and yet qualities from the Ark are reflected in these items. We have seen chests with carrying poles, chests dedicated to gods, chests made of wood and gilded in gold foil, and chests with red cloth covers. Lids made as a single piece with cult statues are in the archaeological record and include the Anubis chest, which is comparable to the mercy seat of the Ark. The Hebrew for the mercy seat is kaporet. I'm sure I'm butchering that, which comes from the root word kapur, meaning to propitiate, smear. When we convert the verb to a noun, the etymology doesn't make a lot of sense. I notice, however, that in the Egyptian, the word cap, lid, exists and refers to a lid used with a coffin. Late Egyptian transforms and drops the final R's, which makes cap a good option for the context, especially given the meaning of aron can be coffin. The ark as a coffin or canopic chest is an evocative image given the complexity of its Egyptian context. Coffins in the Egyptian context serve as proxy bodies that could house the spirit of the dead when returned at night. This is the same function that the idol served, to act as a body to house a god. So to refer to the ark as a kind of coffin may allude to its role as a portable temple or shrine housing a deity, not unlike the Aphthite boxes discussed earlier. But of course, the biggest difference, no idol. God doesn't need us to create a body for him. That's why there is no body on top of the lid in the Hebrew the Hebrew Ark of the Covenant, right? That's a huge point being made using something that they were been very familiar with. Because remember, Israel lived in Egypt for centuries. So they were very much aware of these chests and barks and arks. So when God commanded them to make one, but they were told not to make an idol, that's the difference. And that is a big difference between the ark that the Hebrew people had as opposed to what they saw in ancient Kemet, right? The upright cabinet or shrine began as a utilitarian container with a simple box construction and eventually developed into a specialized chest with a sloping top. Even though the Egyptians used regular chests for storing both sacred and mundane objects, they reserved box-shaped shrines for holding the images of gods or things they considered divine. These shrines developed over centuries and became integrated into more complex forms of furniture. Right? So, yeah, let me just look at what's going on here in the chat. All right. Cool. Let's keep it going. So this is a chest under a chair for the mastaba of Epi, Dynasty 6. Okay. Shrines served as homes for the gods, shielding them from profane elements. The gods were enthroned upon standards with the shrines. These containers enclosed areas of sacred space, and no god was adequately provided for without a shrine to shelter it. When a shrine is placed inside a tent or canopy, the combination forms a complete tabernacle-like religious structure that can stand independently as sacred space. But again, God doesn't need to be protected. He doesn't. He's Yahweh. There's no need to represent him in any kind of idol, and there was no need to protect him. That's why we don't see an idol on top of the lid, right? There's huge theological points being made here by Yahweh by using a modified version of what they've seen in Egypt in these arks. And here's a votive shrine to Wetwawet from the Abydos temple of Seti I. Right? Again, it's starting to look more and more like the ark that we know. Right? It's just a little bit more elongated on top, but it's the basic structure. Car is a broad term that can refer to the stone nails, a portable shrine used in ritual processions, or a palanquin carriage. The kingu could refer to either a portable shrine or a palanquin. These shrines could be adorned with gold and gemstones, and priests could use them to hold divine statuary. And once put into service, these items maintain a continuity of sanctified space appropriate for cultic service. Right? So just like in the when they would create the tabernacle in the Holy of Holies, this is sacred space. This is something that they already understood, but it's being repurposed for Yahweh. And here we have 4 priests carrying a car shrine on poles at the Abydos temple of Ramses II. Right? Again, very similar to the ark that we know of today. As a continuation of the Egyptian tabernacle tradition, shrines were vessels of sacred space. They sheltered divinity from the contamination of profane space, but their function goes beyond just sacred space. The combination of canopy and container alludes to the early history of cultic worship in Egypt. That combination is used in the funerary boats of King Khufu, but it is probable that a tabernacle was used instead of a funerary temple at the Sheila pyramid. Egyptian iconography associated shrines with canopies and tents. This pairing of ritual equipment and its meaning within ancient Egyptian religion is highly relevant for understanding the Israelite pairing of the ark with the tabernacle. The Israelite tabernacle was a tent that the law only permitted the priest to enter. Clearly, the tabernacle was more than just a mere tent. It enclosed sacred space for the purpose of housing a shrine, the ark, and together they functioned as a complete, self-contained sacred estate. The shrine housed and sheltered the deity. The tent provided a boundary between what was sacred and what was profane. To keep a God with the people, the agents felt that only a shroud of holiness could compel a God to stay. They believed the gods were aloof. Gods had to be coerced to stay. That is, held captive in an idol offered against their will. That captivity held a God to service. If the gods fled, they took with them any blessings or protection they might have provided. The Ark of the Covenant was thus a radical departure from the idolatry model of divine blessing. Instead of a God forced to stay and bless, the Israelite God remained voluntarily and blessed by establishing a treaty covenant with the Israelites. And while the maintenance of sacred space was important, the presence of an idol was unnecessary. So you see here, the ancient religion of Egypt is being subverted, but it's also being used to contextualize the relationship that the unique relationship that Yahweh had with Israel, right? Because remember, they just came out of Egypt for many centuries. This is all they know. So Yahweh always wants to communicate clearly what he wants and how he desires to be with his people. So he's using things that they already know, but he's turning these things on its head so that they can understand that even though these look familiar to you, this is very different than what you had when you was in Kemet. Yeah, it's a big deal. The children of Israel used the religious forms and conventions they were familiar with. The Lord manifested himself in a way unfamiliar to the inhabitants of the ancient Near East. So it was a contextualization, but also a subversion at the same time of familiar motifs. Now, this is from excerpt from The Lost World of Genesis 1 by John Walton. As a result, we are now looking at ancient literature to try to decide whether Israel borrowed from some of the literature that was known to them. It is expected that the Israelites had held many concepts and perspectives in common with the rest of the ancient world. This is far different from suggesting literature was borrowed or copied. This is not even a case of Israel being influenced by the people around them. Rather, we simply recognize the common conceptual worldview that existed in ancient times. We should therefore not speak of Israel being influenced by that world. They were a part of that world. So this is for, many people in the community that like to say that, well, Israelites, the Bible plagiarized from ancient Kemet. It's not plagiarism because they're from there. They were there for centuries. They're not Johnny come lately. They're very much part of the culture. So you can't copy something that you're from. They're from there. You might not like the fact that they're from there, but they were for centuries. And again, it's not plagiarism because look how it's being used. It's actually, in a sense, very polemical how these things are being used. So yes, the Ark of the Covenant is very much a Kemetic convention, but it's being usurped by Yahweh to show how unique and different he is from the religion of ancient Kemet. The texts serve as sources of information for us to formulate the shape of each culture's way of thinking. In most areas, there is more similarity between Israel and its neighbors than there is between Israel and our 21st century Western world. As another example, even though today we believe in one God, the God of Israel, and therefore share with them this basic element of faith, the views of deity in the ancient world serve as the context for Israel's understanding of deity. It is true that the God of the Bible is far different from the gods of the ancient cultures, but Israel understood its God in reference to what others around them believed. This is how they understood how unique Yahweh was. by looking at the context of the world around them. How can Yahweh show that he's different? Well, we're going to use these things, these emblems and symbols, but we're going to turn them on its head. So it's familiar, but at the same time, it's going to be different. Okay, so this is, I think this is a relief that we find in the wall of Ramses. This is the war tent, right? So when they would go to war outside of Egypt, they would create this tent. And as you see, there's a line here, and you see that within there's the Holy of Holies, right? With their ark, with their idol, right? Very similar to the tabernacle that God wanted Israel to make when they were on their way marching to Canaan. It's something similar. But it's not Ramses who's the king or any other pharaoh. It's Yahweh. Yahweh is the king, not some mere man. Right? And we see the similarities between Ramses II's camp and the tabernacle. The same pattern, different king, different purpose. So they were familiar, but at the same time, Yahweh is making a very, very distinct point by using things that they were familiar with. So, yeah, it's not a nuclear device. Far from it. Far from it. It is a ritual furniture that symbolizes sacred space, a space that Yahweh wants to connect with Israel. And as believers today, as Christians, we are now the tabernacle in a lot of ways, right? Because the Spirit dwells in us. And now it's our job to expand sacred space, right? So, and that's what it is. So, yeah, the Ark of the Covenant, thoroughly a Kemetic invention. Absolutely. But it's not being plagiarized because they're from there. They've been there for centuries. This is all they know. It's their culture too. It's their culture as well, right? They're not being culture vultures. You can't be a culture vulture if you've been in the same landmass for like 400 years. That's just not true. That's not true. So, but that's the point here, guys. That's the point. You know, Billy Carson, for some reason, doesn't want to look at the actual cultural context of the ark. He actually wants to make this into, the ark is somehow, the Death Star, basically, and it shoots lasers. But no, it's not that. Because for him to say that, he's also, funny enough, not only are you making fun of the Bible, you're also making fun of the Egyptians as well. Because that's not how they saw these shrines and these barks as well. So you're throwing shade at the Egyptians too by doing this. Okay, so, but that's about it, guys. So again, right? Context is king. The Ark of the Covenant, is not the Death Star. It's not some plasma cannon that Israel used to conquer Canaan with. It was a reminder of the sacred space that Yahweh uses. But at the same time, it subverts that space by showing that, as opposed to Egypt, there's no need for an idol. There's no need for me to be protected. But I'm using these familiar motifs so that that even though this is familiar, this relationship that we have is different. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Anytime you see Mr. Carson saying anything like this about the Ark of the Covenant, please feel free to share this video to help Mr. Carson out. All right. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here. Have a good Friday. Peace.